That we're live. Life is a little hectic over here in the virtual world, but we're getting it together. And it's just good to have y'all here and joining us tonight. So just really quickly to introduce your moderators before we start just talking and you're like, well, who are these people? My name is Evan Johnson. My pronouns are they, them, theirs. I am the community manager for TransFamily Support Services. I am joined today by...
I am Jen LaBarbera. My pronouns are they and she. I am the Education and Advocacy Manager at San Diego Pride.
And then we have our special guest who has been so gracious to allow us some of her time tonight, Congresswoman Jacobs, if you want to introduce yourself.
Wonderful. Well, I'm excited to be here with you all.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us. All right, so it was just important to us, in this kind of week of San Diego Pride events that we wanted to get together and have a conversation and be really candid about, there's been a lot of legislation, there's been a lot going on in the world of transgender politics in this past, really forever, but specifically in the past 15 months. And we really wanted to have an opportunity to kind of get into it and have a conversation in the spirit of Pride and in honoring San Diego Pride. So we're super happy to have a representative from San Diego Pride here, since Jen, I'm sure your week has been so incredibly busy. How many events are happening this week? I think you posted like 34 Pride events this week.
37 events in 10 days.
37 events in 10 days. So they're really doing the most. And so we're very lucky to get to have some of their time tonight. And I imagine being in the political sphere at all, like your time is very sensitive, Congresswoman. And so we're very appreciative that you were able to make this conversation happen, especially since it's not like we scheduled it like 4 or 5 months in advance. Your team was very phenomenal and responsive in getting this set up. So unless anyone has other things that they wanted to say, I don't know if Jen, if you had anything you wanted to say going into it, I think we could just get started with questions.
Yeah, I think so. I know that I don't know if Sarah, Congresswoman Jacobs, has anything that she wants to say to kind of lead us off. But I will just say that I am really grateful to have somebody who is such an ally in our congressional seat in San Diego, right? Like that represents the majority of the actual city of San Diego. Where a lot of our trans folks live, right? So I'm really grateful to have you here, and I know that this hits close to home for you as well. So yeah, Congresswoman, if there was anything you wanted to say to start off before we jump into our prepared questions.
Yeah, maybe I'll just start out with a few thoughts to kind of set the stage before we go into the questions. So for those of you who I haven't met yet, my name is Sara Jacobs. I'm very proud to represent the 53rd Congressional District, and my pronouns are she, her. And I am the proud sister of a trans brother and a gender nonconforming sibling. And I also am very proud that I get to represent Hillcrest and North Park and the heart of San Diego's vibrant and diverse LGBTQ+ community. So before we get started on the policy and kind of the doom and gloom of what we're seeing around the country, I want to first start by thanking everyone at TransFamily Support Services and San Diego Pride, because this past year has been incredibly difficult for everyone, but especially for our trans and gender nonconforming siblings. And it is so important that they were able to access resources and support networks, and the pandemic made it even harder. So to Kate and Kathy and everyone at TFSS and Jen and Fernando and everyone at Pride, I just want to extend my thanks to you for all of the work you did to provide services and resources and spaces for trans people and their families. Thank you for your advocacy and your efforts. And just thank you. This has been such a hard year, not only for those of us experiencing COVID, but those of us who during that time, while we were worried about our own family's safety, we're going above and beyond in our work to make sure the community was served. And so that did not go unseen, and we are so, so grateful for you. So I thought I'd just talk a little bit about what's going on in Congress right now and a few of the issues the federal government has been working on in these issues, and then we'll get to your questions. And despite the very many bills across the country in state legislatures, there's also a lot going on at the federal government. So actually my second speech on the House floor in Congress. My first speech on the House floor in Congress was about impeachment, but my second speech on the House floor was about the Equality Act. And it was actually one of the first big pieces of legislation I got to vote for. I'm sure many of you are familiar with it, but just in case you're not, the Equality Act basically amends existing civil rights law to federally prohibit discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity. And as I was giving my speech, it struck me that the first version of the bill had been filed in 1974, 15 years before I was even born. And at the time, it had one single co-sponsor and never got a vote. But this time, it was co-sponsored by the entire Democratic caucus, and it passed the House. However, it is stalled in the Senate. And this is especially alarming because just last month, the Supreme Court sided with a foster care agency that discriminates against LGBTQ+ parents. And as we all know, in 2021 already so far, more than 250 anti-LGBTQ+ bills have been filed in states across the country. So, you know, there's a lot of difficulty, but there's also been progress. So in my position on the House Foreign Affairs Committee, I worked with and pressed the Biden administration to make some much needed updates to their policy on gender markers on US passports. And I'm excited to report that just last week, the State Department announced they were updating that policy, and Americans are now able to declare their gender identity without providing medical documents. And this is they're beginning a process of including a third gender option. So you all know this is not just paperwork, but your identity documents are incredibly important to be able to access services. So I was really proud that we were able to get that done, and hopefully we'll see more progress on that soon. Biden also reversed the Trump era ban on trans military service. And on that, excuse me, I'm actually working with my colleagues right now on a bill, the Armed Forces Transgender Dependent Protection Act, which would make sure that family members of service members are not being sent to countries that prohibit providing gender affirming care, so that family members are able to get the support that they need. And kind of lastly, while you know, Congress has a lot to do, the Biden administration also can do a lot on their own. And let me tell you, having Dr. Cardona as the Secretary of Education is a huge upgrade over Betsy DeVos. And he has made very clear that Title IX protects the civil rights of trans students. And I know my colleagues in the House majority agree, and we're working hard to make sure that Title IX is upheld and enforced. So, you know, I know this conversation, I think we build it as where we're at and where we're going. I think where we're at, I'm sure you all feel this way too. It's a little bit bittersweet. We see signs of progress, but also a broad nationwide effort to fight equality, especially for trans people. But where we're going is actually really, really easy, right? This needs to be a country where trans and non-binary and gender nonconforming and all LGBTQ+ people can thrive, and a country where we all can love and work and learn and be ourselves and feel safe and welcomed and access healthcare and live our lives free from discrimination. So I know you all and I will be working every day to make sure that we build a country and a world where every kid knows they belong. And I'm honored to be doing that work alongside all of you. And now I'm looking forward to taking all of your questions.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman. And it's so funny that you bring up, you know, that last piece about Title IX and our trans students, because our first question actually has to do with our students and access to gender neutral restrooms. So as folks were registering, people can submit questions, and so we're happy to share those questions with you tonight. So the first question for the night is, what progress is being made to ensure all gender bathroom options are available in public schools with multiple locations around campus to ensure that students who use these restrooms throughout the day can use them without being late to their classes?
Yeah, that's a good question. And you know, we know this isn't just about bathrooms, it's about who gets to exist in public spaces. And so I think that there are two parts to this solution. So the first is making sure that trans students can use restrooms that align with their gender identity and have access to all gender facilities. So here in California, we're always ahead of the curve, but nationally, a number of states have not only not implemented this, but actually actively are fighting against it. So really, this will need to be addressed school by school, district by district. But because the Secretary of Education has made clear that the rights of trans students are protected by Title IX, there's federal enforcement that we can do. And we saw good news on this issue at the end of last month when the Supreme Court declined to hear Gloucester County versus Grimm, which means the lower court rulings in favor of allowing students to use bathrooms that match their gender identity remains the legal standard. So this dates back to a 2014 case in Virginia. Federal courts ruled that actions taken against a trans high school student violated the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause and Title IX. So that was good, but accessing the bathroom that matches your gender identity is only one piece of it. And the second step is actually making sure there are all gender and single user options on campus. And all of us really are going to need to keep pushing on that.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, and so kind of staying with the schools and our youth, right? So we know that there are different rules that apply to public and private schools, and oftentimes that disparity is quite clear, especially when it comes to LGBTQ, particularly our trans students. But so the question that came in through registration is, how can our San Diego-based public and private, right, both public and private middle and high schools better support our transgender students?
Well, this is a great question because, and I'm not telling you guys anything you don't know, but trans youth are particularly vulnerable to struggles in school like isolation and bullying and a lack of support networks that, sometimes lead to negative mental health outcomes. And too often schools are also a place of discrimination and a lack of acceptance that they feel in every space they occupy. And so I actually think that every single school official in every single school has a lot that they can do to ensure that every student has respect for their authentic identity and is able to flourish, not just because the Secretary of Education says they have to, but because it's the right thing to do. And I think all of us adults and teachers, especially who are with students every day, can do a lot of things that will make a huge impact. For instance, any student's name and pronouns, that the name and pronouns they tell you should be respected and used. And normalizing asking what students' pronouns are instead of assuming is key in making sure that trans and non-binary and gender non-conforming youth feel they have a space where they're understood. And even something as simple as putting a trans affirming or LGBTQ affirming sign on the door of your classroom can let a student know they're safe. And be on the lookout for bullying or isolation and intervene early if you see it. I think this will go a long way in making sure that our students are getting the support that they need, whatever school that they're in.
Thank you. And if I could take moderator's privilege for a second and also add, TransFamily Support Services and San Diego Pride and a number of other youth serving organizations around San Diego actually just recently released, just last month, the Youth Standards of Care document that can be used by all public and private schools around San Diego, really around the state and around the country, although a lot of them are kind of specific to California laws. But so that is something that is on both Pride's website and TFSS's website. So possibly Martine can throw that on the StreamYard and the banner somewhere. They're managing the back end. So right, there are so many things, and the things that you said are absolutely part of how we better support our trans students. Back to you, Evan, moderator privilege. Ben.
No, thank you. Thank you both, Congresswoman Jacobs, for that very thorough answer, and Jen also for reminding folks that there are institutions in San Diego that are here to support you as you try and serve our youth better. And kind of speaking on to the space of local leadership and local organizations, I think something that we really got to see during this virtual world and this pandemic was the rise of a lot more grassroots organization, a lot more community support for other marginalized communities. And so one of the other questions that came in with registration is, how might you and others invest in building trans leadership opportunities in San Diego County, specifically that center queer, trans, BIPOC folks? And are you aware of any current BIPOC trans-led orgs or programs in the county that you could guide yourself and other San Diego leaders towards in this effort to support them and build that leadership?
Yeah, I really appreciate the question because in my experience, even in LGBTQ plus spaces, too often trans people and particularly trans women of color are excluded and ostracized from positions of leadership. So, I'd like to give a shout out to the San Diego Black LGBTQ Coalition, which is the only Black LGBTQ nonprofit in San Diego, which I know is being recognized with the Service Award at the Spirit of Stonewall rally on Friday for their incredible efforts to support a strong, sustained, and connected Black LGBTQ community. They set up and fostered the first emergency Black transgender fund for trans, non-binary, and gender nonconforming individuals who need emergency assistance. And it's amazing, but there's still so much more work to be done. So if any of you watching run an amazing organization that I should know about or know of an amazing leader that we should be supporting, my colleague David, who's listening in on this town hall with us right now, would love to hear from you and make sure that we are meeting with and discussing the right things. And just quickly before I turn it back over, I'd like to give a shout out to Pride, one of our organizers tonight that's run by a BIPOC non-binary person and who even within the LGBTQ plus community often faces discrimination for their identity. So there's a lot more work we need to do, and I'm looking forward to working with all of you on that.
Thank you. And we will actually hear from another person that is running one of those amazing BIPOC trans organizations in just a couple of questions. I hope, fingers crossed, that they make it onto our stream. All right, so the next question is a question that was built by our moderators, by us. So you already kind of, in the beginning, you already mentioned and discussed the recent win with the US passports and how that will, they're working on getting the X gender marker. Hopefully that is not a, typically protracted, long government process. But we are, in the process of working on it. And so the question is, right, like you're able now with your passport to select the gender marker that you use, regardless of your documentation, and eventually the third gender marker. But how far behind is Social Security in adopting this kind of affirming process?
Yeah, well, you'll appreciate in true government fashion, actually, the holdup with the third gender markup is computer systems, actually, and having to figure out all the kind of ancient computer systems that the federal government uses. But I know that they're working diligently on it. So the State Department policy change will be helpful, not only because I hope that it will lead the way for other agencies to make similar policy changes, but because your passport is one of the documents that you can use to make the change for your Social Security card. So I know President Biden is personally invested in not only undoing the harms from the Trump administration, but really leading on these issues. And I think his firing of the Social Security Administrator, Saul, last week is just one sign that he's very serious about making those changes. And I do think we're going to start seeing more agencies, including Social Security, start to adopt some of these new procedures. But if you change your passport, you can use your passport as an identity document for your Social Security.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Okay, we do have a second question that we as moderators crafted because, we also have questions for our Congress people and our representatives. So this is our other moderator question. And we kind of touched on this a little bit earlier tonight, but in 2021, there have been 50 anti-transgender bills introduced into legislatures throughout the US. A majority of these bills seek to disqualify trans athletes from participating in sports programs of their identified gender. So how are you engaging your other members of Congress to stand against these bills? And how can we in the community support our elected officials in that effort?
And this is a great question. And I realized on the last question quickly, if you are trying to change your passport or you're having an issue with Social Security, please reach out to my office because we have people dedicated to helping you get what you need from federal agencies. And we want to make sure that we are helping you through that process. So if you're having an issue, reach out to my office. It's sarajacobs.house.gov. You can fill out a form and someone from our team will reach out. And literally our job is to be your advocate in Washington with these federal agencies. So please reach out. to these bills, so I'm a member of the House LGBTQ+ Equality Caucus. And as I said, I have a trans and gender nonconforming sibling, including my trans brother who actually plays rugby and follows these issues around sports very closely. So many of you may have been watching when we debated the Equality Act, and a number of my most extreme colleagues, members like Marjorie Taylor Greene, actually made youth trans in sports a focal point, and actually went so far as to repeatedly and intentionally misgender and disrespect the child of one of our colleagues. So in addition to pushing for federal legislation like the Equality Act and calling for a robust defense of Title IX, we have to oppose these bills every step of the way. And I know you all at TransFamily Support Services and similar groups do really important work. And you know what I think is that when we humanize the issue, when parents and students are able to share their stories and testify and speak in the media, it really does change things. And we've seen that before. And so, you know, we know a lot of these bills are based on ignorance and bigotry. We saw when Florida signed their bill on the first day of Pride Month. But when more people see and hear from families that just want their kids to be included and welcomed and treated equally, I think that's really powerful. So not to put it all on you, we're certainly tracking this in Congress and know that we need a federal solution, but I think there's a lot that all of us can do on this issue as well.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And so now hopefully we're going to be able to introduce, like Jen said, yes, one of those community leaders. So Achi is the founder of House of Resilience, which is the first 100% free community housing program specifically for trans women of color. Achi has been doing some amazing work. I've been very lucky to get to see in a periphery, and I'm always impressed. I'm always proud to be a part of the San Diego queer community and getting to see that growth and getting to see that progress. So Achi, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I understand you have a couple of questions for Congresswoman Jacobs if you'd like to ask them.
So first of all, thank you so much for that introduction, Evan, and also hello to everybody on the meeting today. Like Evan said, my name is Achi Vasquez. I am the director of the House of Resilience, and I did come prepared with a couple questions. So I will go ahead and read them now. My first question for Ms. Sara Jacobs is, even in California, or actually let me start here. Even in California, trans women are repeatedly denied for gender affirming life-saving procedures from insurance companies. Just to name one would be Kaiser Southern California is a super, super huge, like, one of these companies that does this so often. So for things such as breast augmentation for trans feminine women, for no other reason other than having like a minor amount of breast tissue or, you know, a multitude of other small things that could easily be worked around, these insurance companies will flat out deny you for your complete procedure, which, you know, a lot of the time results in things like unnecessary trauma, depression, anxiety, and more. Also, these insurance companies can kind of save a couple dollars at our expense because they know that we won't fight back. I guess my question to you is, how will you ensure that this abuse of the transgender community from insurance companies stops?
Well, first of all, hi, Achi. It's really nice to meet you. Thank you for your questions. And I will answer, but first, I just want to thank you and the House of Resilience for all the work you do for the trans community. We were just talking about the need for more amazing leaders like you, and I'm so glad to know that you're here working in our community, and I'm just excited to get to know you. So, on this question, it's actually really alarming because, well, we all know that access to gender affirming care is essential and life-saving, but also it is illegal for them to do this. So, you know, when we passed the Affordable Care Act, we actually put, I wasn't in Congress yet. When the Affordable Care Act was passed, they put a provision in it that made this kind of discrimination illegal. But look, we know that that's not the full answer, and many insurance companies are still not covering these essential procedures. So one, if this is happening to you, reach out to my office, because there might be something that we can do. But second, this is actually why I feel so strongly that we need Medicare for All, and was an original co-sponsor of that reintroduction, because gender affirming care is healthcare, and healthcare is a human right. And we know that profit motive does not work to drive healthcare policy. And so we need to make sure that everyone has access to healthcare, and I think Medicare for All is the way to get there. So
Thank you so much. Evan, should I go ahead and read my second question now?
Yes, please. Thank you, Achi.
Thank you so much. So Sarah, I really quick before I answer my second question, I just wanted to say thank you so much for being here as well. I think that it's a super like broad issue throughout, not even just the rest of the country, but even California, where we are supposed to have, you know, amazing trans healthcare. I'm literally fighting for this as myself right now. You know, a person that's a community leader. I'm a year into an appeal with my insurance company for breast augmentation. And so this is a really far-reaching problem that needs like results very, very soon. So with that, I'll just go ahead and segue into my next question. What is being done for trans people, especially trans women of color, who unfairly face so much discrimination when searching for employment, as well as being let go of jobs unjustly because of transphobia, often disguised through other reasons like being late, tardiness, um, bad behavior, et cetera, et cetera. Trans people must really have equitable ways of attaining self-employment that pays a livable wage. I guess my question to you would be, what is being done to, you know, improve that for the livelihoods of trans people?
well, I totally agree with you. And I think highlighting this discrimination is really important. So thank you for doing that. And let me reiterate what you just said. Trans people deserve a living wage, stable employment, not to have to wonder how they're going to pay for their next meal or pay their rent. So here in California, specifically on employment, discrimination based on gender, gender identity, gender expression, or orientation is expressly forbidden. But as we all know, and as you pointed out, discrimination can be disguised. So in addition to national anti-discrimination standards that are as strong as California's, which we would get under the Equality Act, we also need to raise awareness of this form of discrimination, which will help improve outcomes in courts. And beyond employment, we need to fight discrimination across the board, including by strengthening the Violence Against Women Act and working for an economic recovery that makes sure that communities that have been marginalized are part of the recovery, and not just create a recovery for white cis men, which we will do if we only invest in hard infrastructure as an economic stimulus.
Thank you so much, Achi, for joining us. And thank you, Congresswoman Jacobs, for taking the time to answer questions from folks within our community who are doing this work. Achi, I want to give you space to respond to Congresswoman Jacobs, and also to just, if there's anything you'd like to share with us while we have folks listening, you know, we'd love to give you a space to share.
And I am more than welcome to participate in that space. So hello, everybody. As you know, I've been working through the House of Resilience for a little bit more than a year now. We've done a lot of great work. You know, originally we started as just a fundraiser to enact this program for trans women of color, so they can have a safe place to live. But very quickly we've had to expand our services, because we see, you know, me as a trans woman of color see that there is so many gaps in the system when it comes to aid for trans women of color. You know, so often we are kind of thrown to the side and left to our own kind of facilities to figure out these issues for ourselves. Like, how do we get a job? I I work with a community member who has been searching for a job for the last 8 months, and she's technically still in the military. She has 2 degrees. She literally can defuse bombs, and nobody will hire her. It's been already like 6 or so months that she's been looking for a job. And so things like this to me are unacceptable, especially in the great state of California, where we supposedly have such great trans healthcare and such great trans representation. But we simply need to do more. You know, we need to, it shouldn't fall on just community members who have their own struggles as well. to kind of provide this aid to the community. And so I guess what I would like to say with this kind of little plug that I have would be to support your grassroots, your mutual aid organizations. I would say to support them more than you support white-led 501c3 nonprofits. And we are desperately, desperately, desperately in need of funds always. We haven't been getting the same amount of funds that we were getting in the beginning of our kind of campaign for like the last 3 months. I think it's been less than 1,500 that we've gotten in the last 3 months of operation. To remind you, we have a coffee shop that exists as a safe space and a jobs program for trans women. We have a free clothing program. We have two very amazing peer support groups. And we frequently run events in San Diego and Tijuana. And to continue doing this kind of work, we desperately need to be upheld by the community through donations and contributions and volunteer work. So that's what I would like to leave with all of you today and with everybody that's watching.
Well, thank you for all of your work. And David from my team is going to reach out to you about what more we can do to help support all of your efforts.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Achi. And yes, if you all don't yet know David Vance, you should. They are a gem and just a really incredible human being who is, Congresswoman Jacobs is very lucky to have them on her team. So I'm actually going to go a little bit off script because I am also looking at the comments that are coming in through on Facebook, and I think this is really relevant to what you were just saying, Achi. So funding for trans-led organizations, right? Philanthropic funding for LGBTQ organizations overall is minimal when you look at overall philanthropic funding. For trans-led organizations and trans funding, that number diminishes significantly, even just from that tiny LGBTQ pool. And right, we know that there have been, Sophia mentioned in the comments, AB 2218 in the state level specifically should be providing funds for trans health and wellness. And I personally would love to see more federal funding for trans-led organizations. And so I guess like the question that I want to throw out here is, what does like what more federal kind of support can come, right? I know like there you don't have a whole lot to do with the state budget, right? But like federally, what can federal government do to support our trans organizations? And I also know that federal funding is a nightmare to navigate if you've ever tried to apply for a federal grant. So like what can be done to really ensure that our trans-led organizations are being supported in the way that they should be, right, by our government to do the community work that they are doing?
This is a great question, and honestly a problem across the board, because in order rightly to be a good steward of taxpayer dollars, there tends to be quite a lot of bureaucracy and process around federal spending. And actually, in many cases, it's a lot more work than the money that you're actually getting from the federal government. And so I think that there are some things that we're thinking about in the international context that we could potentially try and do domestically as well, to try and still have protections and make sure that federal taxpayer dollars are being spent well. But also make sure that we're actually getting it to the organizations and groups that need it most, and not overburdening these small groups with so much reporting that it gets in the way of their mission, but also not having the requirements done in such a way that it inherently prioritizes the big organizations, because they're the only ones who can do all of the kind of oversight required. And you know, as Achi, you so rightly said, investing money in these small local-led organizations is really, really important. And so we have to figure out a better way to do it with federal dollars. I'll say the other thing is that we are working to make sure that federal contracting dollars, federal support is going to non-white led institutions and organizations. For instance, with the PPP loan, we made sure that there was a special carve out of funding that went through minority serving and community development financial institutions, so that it would hopefully get to some of those smallest groups, because we know that those groups didn't necessarily have a relationship with a bank. And our office will be holding a grants workshop to help you figure out where and how you can apply for federal money. And if you're applying for a federal grant, you can reach out to our office, and we have folks here who can. I'm just making a lot of work for David, actually, but just reach out to David, and David will give you the help that you need.
And another plug for David for being an absolutely phenomenal member of the team and really putting in the effort to make sure that folks are getting the support that they need. Thank you so much, Congresswoman. And Jen, thank you for being mindful of the comments on Facebook, so that we can make sure to get those in as well. All right. So our next question that we have from folks who registered, it's a question around anti-trans violence, right? So we're seeing an increase of violence against the transgender community year after year. It feels like every year there's a new news article coming out that, 2020 is the deadliest year for trans folks. 2021 is the deadliest year for trans folks. So we're seeing this every year. There's a crisis of fatal hate crimes against trans and non-conforming people, and in particular, trans women of color. So what legislation is being considered to address this crisis, if there is any?
It's a really important question. And I've long been saying that we have an epidemic of violence against trans women, and especially trans women of color. So an important first step is addressing and identifying the problem. So we actually just passed the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act, which President Biden signed into law. And within it, there was an important bill called the Jabara Hire No Hate Act, which creates grants to improve hate crime reporting and helps agencies develop better policies for investigating hate crimes. And we know that a lot of people are reluctant to report these crimes, and many state and local law enforcement agencies aren't fully trained or know how to do trauma-informed processing of that reporting. And so this legislation looks to remedy that, and also includes the possibility of additional penalties under the Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Jr. Hate Crimes Prevention Act. I also think that while it's important to make sure that people feel comfortable reporting and that identifying is a first step, we also need to make sure that our federal law enforcement agencies are stepping up their emphasis on combating domestic violent extremism and white supremacist and other extremist groups, many of which are violently opposed to the LGBTQ+ rights and equality, and really making sure we're addressing that root of the problem is going to be important, so we stop having these numbers increase.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. All right, so we talked a little bit at the top about the Equality Act. We know that it is stalled in the Senate, and until we get rid of that filibuster, it will likely continue to be stalled in the Senate. Right, and so given that, right, so we talked already, the Equality Act passed the House, hooray. In theory, we have a majority in the Senate of folks who support LGBTQ equality. So in theory, and that includes our two senators here from California, right? So we know that our two senators are on board, right? Ours are not the problem children here. So it is a key piece of legislation, will extend protections for all LGBTQ folks across such a wide variety of spaces. And knowing that we are in San Diego, and often, right, we think we're safe and maybe we don't have this obligation to the rest of the country. I would argue that, of course, we do have that obligation. So what is it that we can do to help advocate for its passage?
Well, I will say two things, and I will caveat with, I'm here in my official capacity, so I cannot tell you how to do your grassroots advocacy. But I will say two things. One, while both of our senators are very supportive of the Equality Act, both of our senators are not necessarily in support of filibuster reform that would be needed to actually get it passed. And when my office receives calls on behalf of legislation like the Equality Act, it matters, and we log every one of those calls and we pay attention to what folks are supporting. So I will leave you with those two pieces of information that are not advocating advocacy.
Excellent.
Absolutely. Accessible information that anyone, we could all have said that. And so it's not like, we're doing anything unusual here in this space. But Jen, I mean, like you kind of alluded to with our responsibility, not just to our siblings here in California, but our responsibility here in California to the rest of the country as well. So yes, we're here today as folks within San Diego, as a representative of San Diego, and potentially with like a limited scope in that regard, but knowing that our voices do extend past our state borders and knowing that we are able to support our siblings in other states. Taking moderator privilege for a second as well, we have a chapter of TransFamily Support Services in Huntsville, Alabama. And so being able to share this information with our youth, our young adults, I always call them youth and they're young adults. They're very secure in their adulthood, but who deserve to know how they can be advocating for themselves for the Equality Act with their representatives and their legislators. So thank you for sharing that, Congresswoman Jacobs, because it is information that will grow beyond San Diego and grow beyond California. All right, so some heavy topics that we talked about tonight, as it is wont to do when we're talking about politics, and especially in this past year. But I like to end these things on a positive note, and I think Jen will agree on that. And so I work directly with our youth. My other title is Youth Programming Manager. I facilitate our high school support group, which is technically meeting right now. So hopefully that all started very smoothly without me. And our youth matters so much. I go into our GSAs, I go into our middle schools and high schools, and they have such important things to say if only we as adults listen. And I think this is a really good opportunity, especially being in the virtual world where so many of our youth have access to this sort of space to impart them with messages, right? So Congresswoman Jacobs, I'd like to ask, what message do you have to send to the trans community? And specifically, what would you like our youth to know?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I appreciate the opportunity and the platform, because I know that this past year has been really difficult, especially for trans youth who were forced into social isolation, and communal spaces were closed, and often we're stuck with families and friends, away from friends, and stuck with families who maybe didn't accept you. And so I think the most important thing to say, more than anything else, is to all of our youth, however you identify, whoever you love, whatever you want to be, you are perfect just the way you are, and we need you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I think our youth, and speaking, as a person for a second who I came out when I was 16, I wasn't out to my parents until I was an adult, and being stuck in that environment where I was constantly being misgendered, I was constantly being dead named, I felt very invisible. And I felt like I must not really exist in the scope that I saw myself as, because no adults were telling me that my identity was worth learning or affirming. So to hear a political representative, somebody who, has authority in this country, affirming our trans youth and taking time to speak on this issue, and especially to know your personal stake in the conversation around trans and non-binary identities, it certainly touches me in a very special way. It makes me feel very emotional, and very proud to be in San Diego. So thank you so much for your time tonight. I want to pass it over to Jen to see if they have any other things they'd like to say, because we have so much time.
Yeah, I just want to echo everything you just said, Evan. Like, it's as an old at this point, a yelder is what we call ourselves in the LGBTQ community, is a young elder. And I also feel exceptionally old when I hang out with our youth. But we, right, like hearing that, right, like that you're needed and you matter, right? Like, and also that you're never too young to know who you are. And as somebody who was 35 before they came out as non-binary, you're also never too old to know who you are. And so it is, right, like it is, we're vital, right? We are vital and we are magic, and we are, like, to take Pride's theme this year, we are also hella resilient. And so yeah, so to close, I just want to, for my closing, I just want to thank you, Sarah, and also honestly just thank all of the trans folks in San Diego who exist in the world, all of our trans youth that honestly gave me the courage and confidence to be who I am, and all of the trans folks that are struggling and also thriving every single day in San Diego. So those are my closing remarks. Sarah, I'll let you have some of the last words, I believe.
Well, first of all, if you want to feel young, come visit me in Congress. Does the trick every time. It's always funny when I'm like in Congress, and everyone's like, "Oh, you're so young," and then I come talk to you, so they're like, "You're so old." I know. And you know, I want to thank you, Evan and Jen, and all of the elders, because I know how important having people like you are and having role models like you are. And I know how much of a difference that can make as young people are, struggling through, honestly, a very relatable young person experience, figuring out who you are and who you want to be in the world, and how you want to do that. And I get asked all the time, actually, like how to get involved, how how I was able to do these things as a young person. And I guess what I'd like to leave everyone watching with is that you can get involved before you have the answer to every question. None of us have the answer to every question. And you don't have to know everything. Do your homework, but honestly, there's not some magic person behind a curtain who like actually secretly has the answers and is just like solving everything. So if you have a perspective that you feel like is missing, or if you feel like there's something that you can add to the conversation, then you have to say it, because not just you matter, but your opinion matters, and your voice matters, and your contributions matter. We are in a crisis right now in our country, in our world, and we need all the best ideas and everyone working together to get us out of this. So it's not just that we need you, it's that we need you now more than ever. And I hope that you all know that you're never too young to make a difference. You're never too old to make a difference. You're never too different to make a difference. It's going to take all of us. And I say very intentionally, I'm so honored to be working alongside of you, because while I'm the one sitting in this office and, voting on laws, I just had like a 5-hour-long markup today, voting on some of these laws over Zoom. But I'm here representing our community, and I can only do what I can do when all of you are doing your work too. And so, don't let anyone tell you that you don't know enough, or you're too young, or go read this book before you can say something, because it's just not true. And I'm in all these rooms with all these smart people, and they don't know more than you do. And in fact, often they know less because they haven't gone through the life struggles and life situations that you've gone through. And so I know things seem dark right now and difficult, and looking at all these laws passing, and looking at the Supreme Court, and looking at the Senate not passing the Equality Act, like I know it feels hard. And I'm not going to sugarcoat that. Things are difficult, but they're only going to get better if all of us work together. So, as I started, I will end. I'm so honored to be working alongside all of you. And I hope that this is the start of many conversations. And I hope you, each and every one of you, know how much of an impact you can each make individually.
Thank you so much for all of your, inspirational words. It's so important, in particular for populations who for so long have been spoken over, for us all to know that our voices matter, and that our voices matter to you. So thank you for your time tonight. Thank you for sharing with us tonight, taking the time to answer our questions. I know some of them may have been like awkward or a little like startling, because they're big topics, but I really appreciate personally, and I'm sure Jen and the folks watching tonight really appreciate your honesty and your openness with us tonight. So I would like to thank you, one more time. I'd like to thank all the folks who joined us tonight. We had a little bit of tech issues in the beginning getting started, so I'm just glad it all got off without a hitch. We started on time, we're ending, at an appropriate time. So thank you all so much for watching. Jen, I'm going to pass it along to you though.
And I will just add one more thank you, which is to Martine, who's handling the stream in the back end and made this entire process so easy for us. They're just, yeah, such a treat on the TFSS team. And yeah, thank you all so much. And find us on the internet. You've already found us on the internet if you're watching our streams. And stay connected to your trans community. Give and donate to the House of Resilience. And I think somebody also dropped in Gender Fluid Collective and the Black LGBTQ Coalition and the Latinx Coalition and the API Coalition. These are folks that are doing really amazing work for LGBTQ BIPOC communities here in San Diego. And in Tijuana, right? House of Resilience is binational. And so, keep supporting the folks in your community that are doing amazing work. And thank you all so much. I think that's it.